In the taxonomy of fear, few entities are as misunderstood as the Banshee. Pop culture has reduced her to a screaming specter, a generic jump scare in a B-movie. But if you dig into the old roots of Ireland, into the peat and the bog where the history is preserved in black earth, you find something far more disturbing. The Bean City, the woman of the mound, she is not a ghost. She is not a demon. She is a pre-Christian entity, an ancestral guardian attached to the oldest families of Ireland, the O'Grady's, the O'Neilla's, the O'Briens. And she doesn't just scream. In her oldest iteration, the Bean Nye, she is the washer at the ford. She is found by streams and rivers, scrubbing blood-stained clothes. If you see her washing a shirt, it means someone is going to die. If you see her washing your shirt, the contract is already signed. We like to think of these legends as stories to frighten children. But what happens when the mythology leaves the storybook and physically manifests on your doorstep? What happens when you wake up in the morning and the stones of your patio are wet and you find a piece of cloth that shouldn't exist? This isn't a story I tell for entertainment. This is a documentation of the evidence I found. This is the soaked cloth, the evidence I found after the Banshee cried at my threshold. The Banshee. I've never been a superstitious man. I work in data analysis. My life is built on spreadsheets, predictable outcomes, and the comfort of binary choices. Yes or no, 1 or 0. So when my great-aunt Sorka passed away and left me a cottage in the desolate back end of County Donegal, I didn't think about curses. I thought about property value. The cottage was isolated. And I don't mean suburban quiet. I mean that the nearest neighbor was a sheep farmer 3 miles down a road that was more mud than gravel. The house sat near a small, aggressive stream that fed into a larger river, surrounded by hills that seemed to swallow the sunlight. Hours before the sun actually set, I arrived in late October. The plan was simple. Spend 2 weeks renovating the place, list it on the market, and fly back to Boston with a nice check to clear my student loans. The first 3 nights were uneventful, strictly speaking. But the silence out there is heavy. It has, presses against your ears. If you've ever read about the disappearance of the Flannan Isles, lighthouse keepers in 1900, you know the kind of isolation I'm talking about. 3 men vanished into thin air, leaving a meal uneaten on the table. Skeptics say it was a freak wave, but when you are alone in the Celtic wilderness, you start to understand why those men might have just stepped off the edge. The silence invites you to fill it with your own paranoia. It started on the 4th night. I was in the kitchen, stripping peeling wallpaper that smelled of 50 years of dampness and cigarette smoke. It was around 11 p.m. The rain had stopped, leaving that profound, dripping stillness outside. Then I heard it. It was faint at first. A rhythmic, wet sound coming from the direction of the stream behind the house. Slap, splash, slap, splash. I paused, scraper in hand. My first thought was an animal. A badger or an otter maybe. I walked to the back window and peered out. The darkness in Donegal is absolute. Without streetlights, the world just ends 3 feet past your window pane. I couldn't see anything, but the sound continued. It was methodical. It sounded exactly like someone dropping a heavy, wet towel onto a stone floor, over and over and over. I grabbed a flashlight, a heavy-duty maglite I kept in my truck, and opened the back door. The cold air rushed in, smelling of peat and ozone. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small, pathetic against the vastness of the hills. The splashing stopped instantly. I swept the beam across the yard, towards the stone wall that bordered the stream. Nothing, just wet grass, black stones, and the rushing water. Must be a sheep, I muttered to myself, the classic horror movie coping mechanism. I locked the door, engaging the deadbolt. I went back to stripping the wallpaper, but the rhythm stayed in my head. Slap, splash. An hour later, I went upstairs to the main bedroom. I placed the flashlight on the nightstand. I fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of rising water. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. I didn't wake up groggy. I woke up instantly alert, heart hammering against my ribs. A sound had pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't the splashing this time. It was crying, but not the crying of a child or a wounded animal. It was a low, monotonous droning. Sounded like an old woman humming a melody that had no tune, punctuated by sharp, intake breaths of sorrow. It was coming from right beneath my window. I lay frozen. The rational part of my brain, the data analyst, was trying to categorize the input. Foxes. Foxes scream. Everyone knows that vixen screams can sound like women being murdered. It's a biological fact. But foxes don't weep. They don't sob with a cadence of deep human grief. I crept out of bed, avoiding the creaky floorboard I'd identified the day before. I moved to the window. The crying continued, steady and miserable. I slowly pulled back the curtain, just an inch. The moon had broken through the clouds. The yard was illuminated in a pale, gray light. Directly below my window, standing on the flagstone patio, was a figure. It was small, cloaked in something that looked like gray rags that hung heavy with water. It stood, completely still, facing away from the house, looking toward the stream. Couldn't breathe. My brain refused to process the image. It looked physical, solid, cast a shadow. Then, the figure raised its hands to its face and let out a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a scream. It was a keen, a high-pitched, vibrating wail that bypassed my ears and vibrated in my teeth. It was the sound of total, hopeless devastation. I recoiled, letting the curtain snap back. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own boots, and hit the floor hard. When I scrambled back up to look again, barely 3 seconds later, the patio was empty, but the crying hadn't stopped. It had just moved. It was down by the stream now. Slap, splash, slap, splash. The next morning, the sun was painfully bright, felt mocking. The terror of the night before felt ridiculous in the daylight, like a fever dream that fades when your temperature breaks. I went outside to the patio. I needed to prove to myself it was a prank. Maybe local kids messing with the Yank who inherited the old cottage. I examined the flagstones beneath my window. They were wet, not just damp from the dew, but soaked in a specific, contained circle where the figure had stood. But what chilled me wasn't the water. It was the smell. The puddle smelled stagnant. It smelled like a pond that had been sitting still for 10 years. Rotting, vegetation, and old earth. It didn't smell like the rain. I spent the day driving into the nearest town, a place called Dunglow. I needed human contact. I went to a pub, ordered a Guinness and a shepherd's pie, and tried to act normal. I struck up a conversation with the bartender, an older man named Killian with skin like leather. "You're staying at the old O'Grady place?" he asked, wiping a glass. "Yeah. My great aunt's. Sorka." A tough woman, Killian nodded. "She lived there alone for 40 years. Never married," said. "She preferred the company of the hills." I laughed nervously. "It is quiet out there. A bit too quiet. Lot of wildlife noises at night." Killian stopped wiping the glass. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Wildlife? Foxes, badgers." "Yeah," I said. "Last night I heard something that sounded like crying." The ambient noise of the pub seemed to drop. Or maybe I just imagined it. Killian leaned in over the bar. "Listen to me, lad. The O'Gradys are an old line. High blood, they say. If you hear crying, you lock your doors. You put on the radio. You don't look out the window." "Why?" I asked, my throat dry. "Is it the Banshee? The Bean City?" I tried to say it with a skeptical smirk, but my lip trembled. "Don't say the name," Killian hissed. "It's not a story for tourists. If she's crying, she's mourning. And if she's washing, well, let's just hope she wasn't washing." "Washing what?" "The shrouds," Killian said, turning away to serve another customer. "She washes the bloody clothes of the one who is about to cross over." I drove back to the cottage in silence. The skepticism was eroding, replaced by a primal dread. I parked the car. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley. I walked to the stream. I had to know. The stream was swollen from recent rains. The water was dark, rushing over smooth black stones. Walked along the bank, looking for footprints, looking for anything. I found something caught in the reeds. It was an old wooden comb, not a plastic comb from a drugstore. This was ancient, hand-carved, with half the teeth missing. Felt greasy to the touch. I held it up, and a wave of nausea hit me. The comb was tangled with long gray hairs. "Put it back," a voice in my head whispered. "Do not take that into the house." I dropped the comb into the mud as if it were red hot. I turned to walk back to the cottage, and that's when the atmosphere shifted. The wind died. The birds stopped singing. The silence of the Flannan Isles descended on me again. And I saw her. She was on the other side of the stream, maybe 30 feet away, crouched low on a flat rock. It wasn't the vague shape from the night before. I saw her clearly. She was impossibly small, like a child, but her proportions were wrong. Her arms were too long. She wore a green dress that was darkened with moisture, clinging to a skeletal frame. Her hair was wild, gray, and matted, covering her face. She was scrubbing a white shirt against the rock. The sound was deafening in the silence. Thwack, splash, thwack. She scrubbed with a frantic, angry energy. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of her existence. Then she stopped. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she lifted the shirt from the water. She wrung it out. Red water streamed from the fabric. It wasn't mud. It was bright, arterial crimson. It stained the river, water as it flowed downstream. She turned her head. The hair parted. I didn't see a skull. I didn't see a monster. I saw a face that was red and puffy from centuries of crying. Her eyes were fiery red, lacking pupils, burning with an intensity of grief that felt like radiation. She looked directly at me, and she smiled, a mouth full of rotten, black teeth. "You're early," she whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sounded like it came from right next to my ear. I broke. The paralysis snapped. I turned and sprinted toward the cottage. I didn't look back. I heard the splash of water behind me, heavy footsteps slapping on the mud, chasing me. I slammed the back door, locked it, bolted it, and dragged the heavy kitchen table in front of it. I grabbed my car keys. I was leaving. Now, to hell with the house. To hell with the money. I ran to the front door and threw it open, and I stopped dead. My car. My rental car, which I had parked perfectly fine 10 minutes ago. All 4 tires were slashed. Not just punctured, shredded, and smeared across the windshield in wet, gray mud were 3 distinct streaks. I was trapped. There is a unique kind of panic that sets in when you realize you are prey. Clears your mind of clutter and leaves only adrenaline. I retreated into the house. I locked every window. I drew every curtain. I turned on every light, desperate to banish the shadows. It was 7 p.m. I had a cell phone, but the signal in the valley was non-existent on a good day. Tonight, it was dead. No service. I sat in the living room, gripping a fire poker, staring at the front door. Hours passed. The silence stretched. Then, at midnight, the keening started again. It wasn't outside this time. It was in the walls. It sounded like it was coming from the plumbing, reverberating through the pipes. A low, gurgling moan that rose in pitch until the radiators were vibrating. Theo. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside my head. It was the sound of every funeral, every loss, every moment of grief my bloodline had ever suffered, compressed into a single sonic frequency. Bang. Something hit the back door. Hard. Bang. The kitchen table I had dragged in front of it slid an inch across the floor. Bang. Go away. I screamed, my voice cracking. I don't know you. Leave me alone. The banging stopped. Silence returned. Then, a soft, wet sound came from the gap under the front door. Slap. Water began to seep under the door. But it wasn't water. It was thick. It was dark. I watched, horrified, as the puddle expanded across the hallway floor, and then the doorknob slowly, rustily began to turn. I had locked the deadbolt. I knew I had, but the lock clicked. The metal shrieked as it was forced back by an unseen hand. The door creaked open. The wind didn't rush in. The rain didn't rush in. Standing in the doorway was the woman. The Bean City. She wasn't small anymore. She towered in the frame, her gray rags floating around her as if suspended. In water, her eyes were two burning coals. In her hands, she held a bundle of wet cloth. She didn't scream. She didn't attack. She simply stepped over the threshold. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath misted in the air. I backed away until I hit the fireplace mantel. She walked toward me, leaving wet, bloody footprints on the hardwood floor. She stopped 3 feet away. The smell of the bog was suffocating. She held out the bundle. It was a shirt, a white dress shirt, my shirt, the one I had worn to my grandfather's funeral 3 years ago. I recognized the collar. It was soaked in blood. Fresh, bright blood. "Take it," she rasped. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "No," I whispered. "Take it," she commanded. "It is yours." She dropped the shirt at my feet. It hit the floor with a heavy, wet thud. She leaned in close. I could feel the cold radiating off her skin. "The debt is paid," she said. And then she screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a shockwave. It blasted the windows out of their frames. The light bulbs exploded. I was thrown backward, my head striking the brick of the fireplace. Darkness took me. I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine. I was lying on the floor of the living room. My head throbbed with a concussion rhythm. Sunlight was streaming through the shattered windows. Glass covered the floor. Someone was banging on the open front door. "Hello? Anyone in there?" It was the sheep farmer from down the road. He had seen the smashed windows as he drove past. He helped me up. He asked what happened. I told him a gas canister exploded. I lied. Couldn't tell him the truth. He looked at me with pity, then drove me into town to the clinic. I got stitched up. I called a tow truck for the rental. I booked the first flight out of Shannon Airport. I never went back to the cottage. I sold it to a developer for half its value just to get rid of it. But here is the part that keeps me awake. Here is the part that makes me check the locks on my apartment door in Boston every night. Before I left the cottage that morning, while the farmer was waiting in his truck, I looked at the floor, where she had stood. The blood was gone. The footprints were gone. But the shirt was there. It was dry now, stiff and crusted. But it wasn't blood anymore. It was stained brown like old rust or peat. I didn't leave it. God help me, I took it. I needed to know. I brought it back to the States. I paid a private lab, a friend of a friend, to analyze the stain on the fabric. I told them it was from an old attic find, maybe something dead wrapped in it. The results came back 2 weeks later. The stain wasn't blood. It wasn't peat. It wasn't organic matter consistent with any known animal in the region. The report said the substance contained high concentrations of silica, iron, and trace elements of lichen. But the structure of the fluid was identical to human plasma. It was biological, but it was ancient. But that's not the worst part. 2 days after I got back to Boston, I got a call from my mother, my younger brother, Sean. He lived in Chicago. He had been healthy, 25 years old. He had died in his sleep the night I was in the cottage. The night the Banshee screamed. The autopsy said it was a sudden, unexplained aneurysm, a burst blood vessel. When I looked at the time of death on the coroner's report, 12:05 a.m., the exact moment she dropped the shirt at my feet. The shirt was mine, but the blood was his. I still have the cloth. It sits in a plastic vacuum-sealed bag in a safe deposit box at my bank. I can't look at it. I can't burn it. I'm afraid that if I destroy it, I'll break whatever contract I inadvertently signed. The Bean City is not a monster you fight. She is a courier. She delivers a message that cannot be returned. Sometimes when it rains here in the city and the traffic noise dies down, I think I hear it. A faint, rhythmic splashing coming from my bathroom. Slap, splash. I wonder whose shirt she's washing now. I wonder if she's done with my family, or if Sean was just the down payment. And if you ever hear a crying woman outside your window in the dead of night, do not look. Do not open the door, because once you see the washer at the ford, the laundry has already been done.
Do you hear it too? That I'm so